it's very difficult to interpret events if you go by the media narratives, if you go by the hype, which is coming from a lot of sides, because you have a normal distribution, the Gaussian curve. So you have a lot of people in between who are plain confused. And then you have one fat tail is the TDS people, or Trump derangement syndrome people. And on the opposite end, you have the TLS people, the Trump loyalty syndrome people. And so between all them, a lot of thoughts and interpretations are being bounced around. And we're all guessing because nobody is coming out, spelling it out, and saying, okay, this is what we're doing, and this is the reason. So, Trump himself is playing a tricky game. And I, like most people, am obliged to, kind of look at the tea leaves and try to interpret the situation as best I can. So I've been for the longest time, it's been weeks, right? Since, let's say mid-March when he started Operation Rough Rider bombing Yemen, I've been at pains to interpret what Trump was doing in the Middle East because the whole thing was so incredibly stupid that I thought there's no way this is what it is. Like it looks like something, but it can't possibly be that because even if even if you go by the, like people who hate Trump and um, say that he's really stupid, low IQ, and that people around him are all low IQ people, and even that is, even if you take that into account, his actions in the Middle East are still too dumb still. And so I thought there's something else to this. He wouldn't be just attacking Iran just like that, declaring war or not declaring war, but waging it all the same, because there's very little to gain, and there's a huge deal of risk involved. There's about 20 military bases in the Middle East, up to 60,000 U.S. troops on the ground. There's all these naval assets, carrier strike groups in the Red Sea, in the near the Persian Gulf, that could be reached by Iranian missiles. If I don't think that Trump would want 5,000 sailors in the bottom of the Indian Ocean on his conscience because of something stupid he had done, like attacking Iran. So I thought maybe, maybe they obviously did talk to each other, the Iranians with the American delegations. And maybe, Trump said, look, I can't hold these people back. These people, meaning all the hysterical Jewish Zionists and Christian evangelicals who desperately want war against Iran. And, along with them, all the corporate military industrial complex and banking interests who also want that for their own reasons. Because remember, when Witkoff went to talk to the Iranians at one point in May, I think, last month, he came back to the United States and he thought he had a deal in the bag because he got the Iranians to commit not to enrich uranium to weapons grade, to limit, to 3.75, whatever it is, percent. And then when he came back, the neocons and these Zionist people, they wanted his head and they wanted Hegseth. Hegseth said, because he voted against bombing Iran at that point. And so obviously the situation was very, very tense. And these people were very hysterical, and the pressure on Trump was probably getting very, very difficult to cope with. So, if you can't stand them there, and take on like a stampeding crowd running at you, then maybe you put yourself at the head of them and you run them to off a cliff, right? So I thought maybe Trump went to the Iranians and said, "Hey, look." Oh, and also please keep in mind that suddenly about 10 days ago or so, Iranians announced that they were in possession of all these detailed um, files on Israeli nuclear program, terabytes worth of data, right? Okay. So maybe Trump and his people went to the Iranians and said, "Look, we can't hold these people back. The situation is getting out of hand. We're going to have to do something. So why don't we arrange like an attack? We're going to bomb you. Then you're going to have to retaliate. So retaliate, but you know, don't retaliate too bigly, right? And then we're going to each declare victory, and we're going to call for truce, for peace." And so, and also another reason why I thought something like this must have been going on, in addition to Trump policy on the face of it being like dumber than dumb, is because it's completely at odds with Trump's previously um, announced positions on the Middle East, right? And I'm not talking just over the past 6 months. Even in his prior administration, he didn't want to wage war everywhere. He didn't want the United States to be the enforcement arm of the Western Empire. He tried to bring troops back from Afghanistan and from Syria and from Europe. And now, all of a sudden, he's there defending hegemony of the Western powers in the Middle East for the chief benefit of the European nations and the cheap cost of the United States in terms of blood and treasure. So none of it made sense to me. And then, not to forget, the people who won this war are practically exactly the same people who have been hounding Trump for the past 8 years, putting him through one impeachment after another, uh, roasting him in the media 24/7. And now suddenly he's championing their cause. None of that makes any sense to me. Anyway, okay, so I thought, let's see what happens. If the American attack on Iran looks like a lot of fireworks and nothing meaningful, then maybe it was a deal. And then if Iranian retaliation is the same, then more reason to think that it was a deal. And so the whole thing started to remind me of the World Wrestling Federation, where, they make this big show of great violence and these big fights, but it's all fake, right? And then, everything is garnished and backed up with the trash talk that's equally like abrasive and violent but also fake. These people then go for a drink together and have a barbecues and so forth. So I thought, let's see. Anyway, as it turns out, the U.S. attacks on Iran were, negligible, didn't achieve a thing. Iranian retaliation against the United States, same thing. Nothing happened. They told them, we're going to hit this base. So they evacuated everybody. Not a single casualty, right? And then everybody turns around and declares victory. And now they're going to negotiate peace. And J.D. Vance is announcing a new era of peace and prosperity in the Middle East. And the Iranians are committing to a ceasefire, and the Israelis are committing to a ceasefire. So it seems to me that Trump did exactly what I suspected he would do. He put himself at the head of the stampeding herd, and basically he led them, and then led them astray So in the end, the United States avoided going to war against Iran. There was no regime change in Iran, which is exactly what the neocons wanted. And the United States carries on negotiating with Iran and mediating peace with Israel, along with the Qataris. So far, so good, Andy. But the problem is still Syria, because, the neocons are not as powerful in the United States, even though they're very, very few and they represent essentially nobody. They're not that powerful just like that, the somebody's backing them. And it looks to me that there's a lot of interlocking relationships between leading neocons and people in the British foreign policy establishment and the intelligence agencies. And, for them, the name of the game is not peace or stability, it's hegemony. And the requirement to defend the hegemony is obviously to have decisive mediation role in, who gets what chunk of the Middle East to develop to as their market, as their natural resource wealth, and so forth. And so this always is going to be drawing back to the European colonial powers, like primarily Britain and France, but then also others to a lesser extent, like Holland, Belgium, and so forth. Anyway, the preservation of the Iranian regime and peace at this stage are running exactly counter of the European colonial interests. And, the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, and the Biden administration were all serving these European colonial interests, which is what I think is the problem in the United States, because, this is not just Trump opposing this. I think there's a much more broad-based opposition to this. And part of why Trump walked out on the JCPOA is because, again, the United States found itself in the position of kind of like a guarantor of the deal